Hi guys, just to let you guys know that this is a re-upload from my old channel. I think it's more applicable to first class junk, hence why I'm re-uploading it. It's also being re-edited, so more things will be added and it will fit more of the style of this channel. Just to let you guys know that there are a lot of controversial opinions in this Pixar ranking video, so please don't take it to heart. Please listen to what I have to say. If you think I'm wrong, fair enough, but let's have a civil discussion about it, guys.
At one point, Pixar was regarded as the king of making computer-animated kids films. Before the 2010s, Pixar released hit after hit. The past several years, however, have been incredibly lackluster for the company. It's not comparable to a company like DreamWorks, who have always had a dodgy track record. In this video, I will review every single Pixar film and rank them from worst to best.
27!
The Good Dinosaur really sucks. It's one of the worst animated films I've ever seen. And I've seen The Wild. And the fact that it's from Pixar is embarrassing. Apart from the tech demo landscapes, everything else here is terrible. The character designs are generic. The story is generic. The plot points are just stolen from other better animated films. And it just comes off as extremely lazy. Seriously, what on earth were they thinking with this movie? The generic plot falls completely flat when you have one of the worst ever lineups of animated characters I've seen in a movie. They are so incredibly one note and boring to watch that I could not care less about what happens to them. The writing in this movie is also insanely stale and jaw-droppingly idiotic.
If we don't get this harvest in before the first snow, we won't have enough food for winter. I know it's hard without Papa, but I need you to do more, Arlo.
Did an AI write this shit? I just don't get it. Somehow Pixar made a film worse than Cars 2, and I think it's worse by a decent amount. I can at least see some fans of that franchise and babies liking Cars 2, but this appeals to no one. The fact that this came out in the same year as Inside Out is very telling. They must have put all their resources into that movie, because the quality difference is night and day. This is an awful animated kids film. Please never watch this if you haven't already.
It's junk. First class junk.
26!
I was actually expecting more from Cars 3. I heard it was the best in the series. But no, I think it's just about the worst in the series. There's a correlation in films that get forgotten to time, and that's the boring ones. Cars 3 is crushingly boring. There's no other way of saying it. It's a very painful watch. It's just the first Cars again, with a cookie cutter done to death message with characters that I don't really give a shit about. We'll get to what I think about Cars 2 later, but at least things happened in that film. It feels more like a movie, a fucked up movie for sure, but at least they tried something different. I just don't know who this movie appeals to. I can see young kids enjoying Cars 2, and at least the first one is the original idea, but this one has nothing. The lack of meta in this film is similar to what happened to Jar Jar Binks in the prequels, but in this one I was actually happy to see meta in the few scenes he was in. He is a comic relief. People hated him when he became the main character, but I would have rather seen him a bit more than boring melodrama. Cruz is unbelievably annoying, and makes the first part of this film the most painful. The movie gets a tiny bit better when, you know, the paper-thin plot actually pushes forward. But no, this movie is very bad. How could a company like Pixar make some of the most boring animated films of all time?
It's junk. First class junk.
25!
Yeah, Cars 2 sucks. I have no idea what they were thinking with this one. Nobody really loves this franchise anyway, so to make it a spy sequel is insanely stupid. And to focus on meta, the annoying as fuck comic relief is just baffling. Any merit or good intentions you could argue for the first film is completely tarnished in this movie. If it wasn't for being a Cars sequel, you wouldn't even know that it's a Pixar film. There is nothing of merit at all really, apart from the animation being okay, and in a backhanded way it's not the worst animated film I've seen. The premise really kills this film. Making it a spy film with cars shooting each other is just too weird, and out of place for anyone other than little babies to enjoy. The original characters are mid anyway, but the new characters they add are so incredibly forgettable, with nothing interesting about them at all. Mater says the dumbest shit all the time, and the spies just all conveniently ignore him. It's just baby humour, and there was not one funny joke in this one. I think the messaging of this film, of acting the same way despite your situation, is bullshit. Mater ruined the promo event for Lightning McQueen, and there is a time and a place to act like a fucking moron.
It's junk. First class junk.
24.
Cars is for sure the black sheep of Pixar's better years. To go from The Incredibles to this is frankly embarrassing. It doesn't absolutely suck, but it sure is boring. And in some ways that's even worse. The story is just way too generic. It's not funny in the absolute slightest, and the side characters are insufferable. I could have not cared less about anything in this film. It was just an absolute chore to get through, and because of this, the emotional moments fell completely flat. There is so much boring filler in this movie, which makes absolutely no sense, considering this film is almost 2 hours long. I think this movie would be significantly better if they cut out a lot of this crap. The editing in this is quite weird too at points. It's way too in your face in the worst way possible. They even messed up the credit sequence in this film. In previous Pixar movies they were incredibly funny and had a focus on the bloopers, but this is just all over the place. At least there's no liar reveal BS in this movie, but it sure seems like they are trying to set one up. Once they finally get out of Radiator Springs, the message, well done to death, is done reasonably well, even though you could see it coming from a mile away.
23.
Wow, this movie was a lot worse on rewatch. Talk about a film that has nothing to offer after watching it a first time, and I really mean nothing. This is definitely the contender for the most bland Pixar film. The romance between Fire Girl and Waterboy is fine, and the characters are fine, and the story is completely average. At least the animation is great, I guess, and I guess there are a few funny moments at least. But the stakes are ridiculously low in this one, as there really isn't a villain at all. It just feels like a worse version of Zootopia, to be honest. And yeah, apart from the fire and water people, what is the point of the others? It just comes off as a completely half-baked idea. It's an entertaining enough movie, and the animation is really good, but I can't see myself watching this again soon.
22.
Lightyear is a very bizarre film that I actually don't think is the worst movie in the world. However, there is no way that this was the film that Andy and many other kids loved. It's very dark and gloomy, and is spent on the same planet for the entire runtime, which results in an average sci-fi film, but a bad Buzz Lightyear movie. I was surprisingly invested by the premise, and the fact that Buzz keeps getting sent into the future is a very cool idea. In fact, I really like the premise. The issues lie with Buzz Lightyear. He's supposed to be this optimistic, fun guy, but you don't really see much of that in this film. Why would Andy even care about this movie, especially considering how young he was? In fact, if you remove Buzz Lightyear from this film, and replaced it with another protagonist, nothing would change. If anything, it would probably make it better, because that way you're not getting disappointed. And the villain is insanely dumb. Maybe the most stupid twist I've ever seen in a Pixar film. Why would any kid want to have Buzz when he's also the villain? And also, why would you not kill him now? Or at least lock him up or something? There is a chunk of cringy humour, and quite a few eye-rolling references to the better version of Buzz in the Toy Story films. And to be honest, his team are quite one-note and dull as well, and I don't know why he would pick them at the end of the movie, to be honest. They are really not that good, especially the Taika Waititi character. He's absolutely useless. If you go into this expecting an average sci-fi film, you may have a good time. But this is not Andy's favourite movie, Jesus Christ.
You stupid.
They're not.
While there's one thing for sure, Dory would not get along with Anakin.
I like sand.
Finding Dory is a very average movie. I could have spent my whole life without seeing it, and it doesn't really need to exist, to be honest. But it's not offensively bad like some other animated films. I mean, it's hard not to compare it with how great the first film was. The two things that this movie lacks is compelling side characters and an emotional weight to the story. All of the side characters in the original Finding Nemo are almost engraved into my memory, but in this movie the new characters don't really cut it. Hank is decent, but the rest range from mid to annoying. There are some of the original characters from the first one, but they don't even bring back the Tank Gang. There were some deleted scenes of them, but they are nowhere to be found in this film. And I think Marlin can do some really stupid things in this movie. I don't know why he would bring his son across the whole ocean again to risk his life. Did he just forget that Nemo is a child? And then he tries to blame Dory for this when he was the one who brought Nemo. It's just stupid. And this hurts the emotional part of the story. In the original Finding Nemo, it seemed like Marlin was put through life and death situation to save his son, but he wasn't dumb about it. They seem to risk their lives 24/7, and they just don't seem to care about it. And yeah, it's been said to death, but the climax is very stupid. The animation is great at least, but to be fair, the original still holds up on that front.
20.
I was really not looking forward to watching Onward. From what I heard about it from a lot of people, it didn't sound good at all, but I was actually surprised. It was just okay. I think the issue with the film roots from the premise itself. At its core, it's just a buddy road trip movie with Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, and that premise alone does not interest me in the slightest. It's true that this film is not funny, and the first third is quite boring, but the story does eventually pick up a bit, and the ending is actually quite heartfelt. There is not much to say about this one at all really. It's a complete average experience for a film, but the fact that it's Pixar, known for their original stories that are highly creative and innovative, it's just a testament to how far the quality of Pixar has dropped in recent years. It seems like there is a lot of potential for this mystical setting, but they don't seem to understand what potential it really has. I could have seen this film working a lot more if it was made during the mid-2000s Pixar run. Or who knows, maybe they wouldn't have made this film at all.
What's 9 plus 10?
I have realised while making this video that the very best Pixar films have three main things in common. They have a great story, great humour, and a great villain. Yeah, Luca has none of these. Many Luca defenders claim that the simple story makes it so good and that they want more Pixar films to be like it. I actually think that's the biggest issue with this movie. It's too short and too directionless. To be fair, the film has some dumb moments in the first half, but more time should have been focused in the ocean, as there is very little world building on how the monsters live. You could argue that it doesn't matter much to the story, but maybe it would have made me care more about the characters. I think the acting on the whole is actually very good, and the characters are fine enough, but nothing special. Another thing to consider is the humour, and for a movie trying to be funny, it almost never lands. And the worst part of the film was the villain. Holy shit, this villain is awful. It's 90s bully level bad, one of Pixar's worst. What an utter embarrassment. I haven't been nice to this film, but I guess what stops it from being the worst is I don't mind the characters, for the most part. The animation is also good, and it's also got some charm and heart to it. But sadly, it's low-key a hollow experience.
18!
Let's be honest, we all know that DreamWorks is better with portraying red pandas. Turning Red is basically Luca again, but the issues are not as bad in this one. It's overall still quite mid, but I think it's better paced, and the conflict has more weight to it. Turning Red has a clear direction and an infectious energy to it, which is for sure respectable, especially for modern Pixar. I mean, again, it's still really not that funny, but it was funnier than Luca. I mean, at least in this film the mum and dad were funny. The main villain of the story is better than this fucking idiot. The mum character is overall batshit crazy, which is amusing, but I feel like at points she is a bit too crazy. Like, this felt like a dream sequence. The animation is good, but like Luca, I'm not a big fan of the art style. Come on Pixar, stop being so generic. Be more like Soul. And I know other people have mentioned this, but every time I watch this I think to myself, why aren't we watching a film on the Red Panda backstory? That shit sounds way more interesting.
17.
Monsters Inc. is a Pixar film that I've always wanted a sequel to, as there is so much potential there. So when they announced Monsters University, I was quite disappointed, and yeah, after watching it recently I can't really say it's a good film. It's an average watch for the most part, with generic college stereotypes and tropes taking up most of the film, and it's just not that engaging, and it's definitely not Pixar. The Uzma Kappa characters are unfunny and forgettable, and the Jock Chads suffer from the same issues. Mike and Sully are always fun to watch, but the wasted potential here is mind-blowing. I don't get who at Pixar thought that Monsters Inc. needed a college prequel movie. It's just baffling, to be honest. It's way too long as well, as the generic college movie antics get tiring quite quickly. And how the hell is this longer than Monsters Inc.? It seems like so much more happened in that one, and it is nitpicks, but there are some plot conveniences in some parts of this film which actually make no sense if you think about it. Why on earth would the Rangers chase a bear at night with seemingly no weapons? There are a few more things like that which are just not well thought out. I will say, like many others, the ending and message is fantastic, and hits closer to home once you get to that part in your life. And to be fair to them, you're never going to beat the original score, but Randy Newman still does a fantastic job with this one. It's really good.
16!
Inside Out was decent. It's not a top tier Pixar film, or the second coming of Christ like some people claim it to be, but I just about had a good time with it. Inside Out has some really vibrant animation, which is helped by some very good character designs. This also sets the tone for the whole movie, being mostly light-hearted fun. It's not the funniest movie in the world, but there were several times where there was a good joke or some fun slapstick. I can see the hype around this film for sure, particularly at the time. It seems like Inside Out was the first Pixar film in a while that had a defined idea throughout the movie. You can really respect Pixar for trying on this one. However, the actual idea itself isn't the most original, but it's executed well enough throughout the film, and what they actually do with it makes it more original. It's a fine animated road trip movie like Finding Nemo, but with way less memorable side characters. And although it's far from great, Inside Out is a fun time with a good message.
Hey, Sal.
Hi.
Technically speaking, A Bug's Life holds up a lot better than Toy Story. The jump from that film to this is quite clear, and it still looks decent even today. However, better visuals mean nothing if the film isn't good, which thankfully it is. Unfortunately, the plot is definitely more generic than the first Toy Story, and it just feels like a standard kids film at times. There's also the Lyra reveal moment in this film, which is really stupid considering that the first Toy Story managed to not have this issue. The characters are decent, but none really stand out in my eyes. The film is funny enough at points, but isn't laugh out loud funny or anything. Kevin Spacey plays the villain quite well as he does in real life, and the climax of this movie is really good. There's not too much else to say about this film. It's one of those movies that is quite forgettable, but there's just enough good stuff in it for me to recommend.
14.
This may be the most controversial opinion in this video. People love WALL-E. It's the highest rated Pixar film on IMDb, with an amazing score of 8.4. But to be honest, I don't really get it, and I rated it a 4 out of 10 on my previous watch. However, after watching it after a while, I can safely say that it's decent, but nothing more than that. I have a problem with the film that some other people seem to have, where they prefer the first part on Earth with minimal dialogue. WALL-E is a very good character, and how they showed his day-to-day life and meeting Eva was well done. However, once they get to the ship, I kind of clock out of this film. The humans are very bland and not designed very well, and it kind of sours how unique the start of the film was. To be fair, I liked how this movie is a warning message for society. It does seem like every year we are getting closer and closer to becoming absolutely useless, and the fear of AI taking over has exemplified massively recently. Speaking of the AI, the villain is interesting, but isn't executed that well. It's quite by the numbers and not very nuanced. Overall, I enjoy parts of WALL-E, and even if I do think it's a decent film, it's just that. I don't get the massive praise for it at all.
13.
Well, this is a controversial take. This could actually be the most overrated Pixar film ever. I mean, it's a decent film, but nothing really that special. The third Toy Story has a fine plot with funny enough likeable characters, but it doesn't really stack up to the first two. I just don't get it. The first two were extremely innovative and fresh for animated kids films, but tell me this, what does this movie actually add to the series? This one is just Toy Story 2 again, but worse. Lotso is a very mid-Pixar villain, and it's just Stinky Pete again. Their backstories and motivations are just too similar. The second one was about what happens if Andy grows up, and it kind of wraps that up perfectly, in the way that they just accept it. The third film is them accepting it, again. You could remove this film completely, and it wouldn't really change much from the other two. And maybe it's just me being cynical, but the ending is kind of laughable. This one lacked the great emotional beats that many other Pixar films have. I know this is extremely subjective, but films are subjective. Look, don't hate me, I just don't think it's that great.
12.
Okay, now this could get me some hate, but to be honest, I kind of like Brave. I think it's a decent movie, and I don't agree with some of the criticism it gets. I find the issues with the film in some ways still make me enjoy it, and it's far from perfect and I don't love it, but I had a good time watching it. Brave had a troubled production history, and originally had Brenda Chapman to direct it, who made The Prince of Egypt, but after some disagreements with John Lasseter, the movie was passed on to Mark Andrews. So Brave is a movie with a lot of ideas and potential, which are mostly unrealised, but it's not to say that I don't enjoy the elements that it does well. What Brave does best is its heart, tone and humour. Its characters are all likeable and have their moments, and I'm sorry but Merida is not as annoying as some people make her out to be. The story is far from original, but with some movies the execution makes it good enough for me, so you end up with an average story with decent humour and likeable characters. It is true that some story elements don't go very far, and I would have liked to see more of the mystical elements, but to be fair this film shows them at a serviceable level, and there are a few standout scenes that are genuinely well done. And because this film doesn't go too far in all the plot points, it's paced extremely well. Of course there's a lot of lost potential here, but it doesn't make it a bad film, not by a long shot. I will stand and die on this hill. I liked Brave, and me saying that in itself is quite brave.
11.
Toy Story 4 had even less of a reason to exist than the last one, and when I first watched it, I didn't really like it that much, but after re-watching it, I actually quite like it. I still think they should have stopped after 2, but I'm still glad it's not terrible. I guess Toy Story 4 is the Temple of Doom of the franchise. It feels the most disconnected, doesn't have much to do with the overarching story, but I still had a good time. The best part of the film is the animation. The difference between even the last one that was released in the same decade is crazy. Honestly, with tweaking some of the main story, this feels like it could have been a direct-to-video sequel after Toy Story 2, with the gang saving Bo Peep. I had fun with the adventure this time around, and didn't really need the main plot with Woody finding where he belongs. He found that out 2 other times already, like, make up your mind. It's also sad that you don't see much of the other toys, which I guess is partly due to Don Rickles sadly passing away. I would happily watch this one again, but it's not one of those great animated Pixar films.
Number 10.
After watching most of Incredibles 2, I thought it was a very solid Pixar film, and better than I remembered. It was funny, had great animation, and had a fantastic soundtrack. However, after watching the last third I remembered why I didn't like this movie that much. It's decent, and there is some great stuff in here, but it just feels a bit hollow by the end of it. I think maybe the first issue is that it doesn't hook you like the first one brilliantly does, and I think that's because the film itself doesn't have too much to say. Keeping the family the same age makes me question if it was Brad Bird's decision or Disney's. This film just feels a bit corporate in the way they played it safe in the fact that it feels less adult than the first one, which isn't terrible, as the Jack Jack scenes are actually funny. But let me ask you this, was it Brad Bird's choice to keep Jack Jack a baby, or was it Disney's? They loved showing Jack Jack in the teaser trailers. I think it should have started off with the Underminer, and then jumped some time into the future. It could have made the family dynamic and the storytelling way more engaging, but no, they play it safe. And they have this bullshit twist villain that is stupid because of the motives. The third act of this movie is where I really switch off. It gets way too generic, and there is no part that wows me like the original did. Also, the designs of the new superheroes are so awful. Wasn't the whole point of Syndrome being so evil? Was the fact that he killed almost all of the supers? It seems like they are retconning it a bit, and it weakens the first movie in some ways. This seems like a direct-to-video level plot to be honest, which would be fine if people didn't think the first film was so good. Although on a technical level the animation is amazing, I prefer the style of the first movie, making it seem like modern day in the 60s at the same time. In this one they go full 60s mode. To be fair, I guess it's just down to preference. Some of Brad Bird's greatness shines through though, with some creative action sequences, some great background designs, and of course the comedy. But when you go from the Iron Giant, The Incredibles and Ratatouille, something doesn't add up here. But who knows? Maybe he just released a film below his standards. Coco is easily the best Pixar movie from the 2010s, and that decade ranged from okay to awful, so that's not really saying much. I honestly think it's a solid movie. Bravo Pixar, you finally made an actual good film again. To start off with, Pixar knocks it out of the park again with the animation. It's incredibly vibrant and detailed, and I kinda wished I saw this on the big screen. It is true that the film is not the funniest, but there was not one eye-rolling joke to be found. What this movie truly excels in is the heart that Pixar was once known for. I think the last Pixar film that worked this well emotionally wasn't even released in the 2010s. And the emotion and heart in this is so good that I think people overlook its flaws. The story is quite cookie cutter and predictable at times, but the other times it works really well. And the characters are honestly so charming and likeable that it doesn't really matter. Pixar also managed to do a good twist villain again, although he is incredibly stupid. Side note, Miguel happily risked his life on the threat that he wouldn't be able to play music anymore. That's dedication.
You got Steve in me.
Considering how long ago Toy Story was released, the animation holds up quite well. Although it looks dated, the toys themselves don't look half bad for a film that was released almost 3 decades ago. The humans in the background, however, don't always tend to look that great, but again, you can't really blame this film as it was the first of its kind. At least it looks better than some animated films released years later. I also think the dated animation adds some charm to the film. Toy Story is also incredibly funny, no thanks to the good story and iconic characters. I think that Tom Hanks was born to play Woody, and this is his best role ever. I like seeing Woody be an asshole, and his story arc of being not so self-entitled is enjoyable to watch. Buzz's character arc is in my opinion equally as interesting, and kind of deep for a kids film. Also, R. Lee Ermey as the sergeant is very clever, and gives me flashbacks to a more adult film. Then we have my boy Sid Phillips. Sid Phillips is the most misunderstood character in all of fiction. He was just using his toys in a different way to have fun, and he obviously wasn't aware that they were sentient beings. His home life seems awful too, so you have to cut the guy a break. I also think the soundtrack is great, and say what you want about Randy Newman, he kills it in this movie. The pacing is perfect in this film and there's not a single dull moment, and it's crystal clear that a lot of thought and effort was put into this.
7.
Up is one of those Pixar films that I've seen countless of times, as I owned it on DVD. However, after watching it recently, I definitely appreciated it more. The opening to this film is heartbreaking and really well done, and even if the rest of the movie isn't as good, it's still a fun time. All of the characters range from good to great, and I didn't find the dogs too annoying. I found what this movie excelled in was its more subtle moments of heart, such as the night scene with Carl and Russell. Not everything is blatantly explained to you, but it's easy to put the pieces together, and I think it's very powerful. This movie can be quite in your face at times, but I think it hits its emotional moments very well. I think this movie is also elevated with its excellent score, which has become one of the most iconic soundtracks in recent cinema. The Academy Award was more than well deserved in my opinion. The film's message, of course, is about letting something go and moving on, and that's what separates Carl and Charles Muntz. He's a good Pixar villain, and you do sympathise with him, until you realise just how crazy he's become. And for the doubters, Charles Muntz could easily still be alive. The director Pete Docter confirmed that Carl is 78 in the movie, and Charles Muntz is 93. Sure, it is a bit crazy that someone that old can live in the wild for that long, but it's like other great Pixar films. There are moments where you kind of have to suspend your disbelief for a bit. And to be fair, it's not the funniest Pixar film, but it does have its moments from time to time. The animation holds up very well, which is great considering it was made 14 years ago. although I do think the character design on Russell is a bit weird.
6.
I really liked Soul. I think it's a great movie, honestly. And I'm shocked that Pixar released this in the same year as Onward. Yeah, that's quite embarrassing. What shines through with Soul is that Pixar had a very distinct idea with this one, and it just works really well. The message of enjoying your life regardless of your achievements is really deep and thought-provoking from Pixar. It's a bit similar in a way to the brilliant message of Monsters University, but they actually had an idea for the whole movie with this one. All of the characters are extremely likeable. Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey bounce off each other surprisingly well. And actually I think Tina Fey does a better job here than in Megamind. Don't kill me guys, you know it's true. Even the side characters like the hairdresser and the Graham Norton character all add so much to the story and are all so fun and interesting to watch. The soundtrack isn't talked about enough either. It's very cool how they included jazz for the real life scenes and these cool new age sounding tracks to the other world. It's just very unique. The designs are also very imaginative in the other world, and the characters in particular here are consistently funny. This is what a modern Pixar film like Coco was missing. The emotional moments hit really hard, and make me appreciate just how adult this one is. It's probably the most consistently adult Pixar film. There are a few nitpicks for sure, like how can 22 hear Joe when he's a cat in the real world? But they don't change my enjoyment that much at all. Soul is a unique, emotional, fun time that is worthy of being a great animated film, and probably one of Pixar's best.
5.
From memory, Finding Nemo was always a very solid Pixar film, and watching it this time around was definitely no different. What makes Finding Nemo stand out from the later Pixar films is its heart and comedy. Pixar are in their prime at this point, and it definitely shows. It was actually refreshing to see an animated film that works in both these aspects, particularly after watching, well, this shit. The animation holds up extremely well, especially considering Shark Tale came out a year later. The main aspect that makes Finding Nemo better is its constant charming characters. Shark Tale's characters make me want to vomit, but every encounter in Finding Nemo is memorable, and for all the right reasons. The film cuts from Marlin and Dory to Nemo and the Tank Gang, and both storylines are just as entertaining as each other. It kind of makes me annoyed that the Tank Gang don't return after this film. And as for Marlin's storyline, it works extremely well, and it may contain the only piece of media where Ellen DeGeneres isn't completely insufferable.
4.
Toy Story 2 is a fantastic film and a worthy sequel. It did everything the first film did but better, and expanded the world that created a more interesting storyline. This could be one of the funniest Pixar films. It's incredibly well paced, and goes from iconic scene to iconic scene. There is not one joke that misses in this. I always respected the smaller things in this film too, like the creative ways there are transitions in the scenes. Little things like this always put Pixar ahead of the others for me. Having Woody turning out to be a rare toy creates a brilliant dilemma for the movie, and you can understand him deciding for either option. It feels completely genuine, and thankfully avoids the liar reveal subplot. The new characters are great too. Al is funny, and is utilised way better than Sid, may I add. And the twist villains make perfect sense and don't feel forced like the later Disney films. The addition of Jessie adds heart to the film, which works incredibly well, accompanied with another top tier soundtrack by Randy Newman. The animation holds up great considering it was released in the last century, and the whole film was made in only 9 months.
3.
When rating Ratatouille, it's hard not to compare it to the other Pixar film by Brad Bird. For the longest time I thought that Ratatouille was easily better, and also the best Pixar film. In fact, almost too good for Pixar's standards. However, after watching it after a few years, I can say it's still a great movie, but not one without its problems. For example, the start of the film does not hook you in the same way The Incredibles does. It looks good, but just a generic animal movie on rats, which kind of has some truth to it to be honest. Remy's family is not really that interesting, and we spend a decent amount of time with them. On the flip side with the humans, I think Linguini is fine, but nothing special at all. And the rest of the chefs are quite interesting, but there are way too many to fully flesh out any of them. And while I definitely prefer the designs in The Incredibles, Ratatouille's animation has held up a lot better, and I really enjoy how fun the animation gets at times, especially with Linguini's movement. It makes it more believable that a rat could actually control him. I do think that Remy betrays Linguini way too quickly. It was literally a few scenes ago where Remy was hiding his identity, but then he suddenly wants all the attention. It just seems a little too forced to create unneeded conflict. The other parts of the forced conflict seem to be with the chefs. It's an unbelievable scenario of a rat controlling a human, but surely they would have at least wanted to see proof before completely quitting on the spot. What makes Ratatouille great, however, is its atmosphere tone in the villains. Both of the villains are so incredibly entertaining to watch, and they both get the perfect amount of screen time for their purpose in the film. And the ending in this film is one of my favourite endings ever. It's just so perfect and thought-provoking. The brilliance of the last 20 minutes is just so good that it kind of elevates the film for me. I'm sure a lot of people won't agree with some of the stuff I said, but for the record I still really like Ratatouille.
2.
What more can I add to what might be the most celebrated Pixar film ever? The Incredibles is arguably the best superhero film ever, which is surprising considering the genre was just getting started at this point. I think the storytelling in this film excels over everything else, and it makes the rest of the film really work. Mr. Incredible is such an interesting character, and his good attributes and shortcomings shape the whole conflict of this story. Unlike some people, I thought his family had enough screen time, and everything played out well in the end. Because the story is very adult at times, featuring things like this makes the film extremely entertaining for every audience. It doesn't feel dumbed down or kid-like at all. It's also extremely witty, having some very animated crazy characters, which are just as memorable as the main characters. The comments on the superhero cliches also work very well, as they're not rammed down your throat, and it doesn't detriment the story at all, or make it less believable. And of course, the orchestral score is incredible, being incredibly catchy and extremely fitting of this movie. It's one of the main things you associate this film with, and you can't say that for a lot of modern superhero films. Maybe one fault of this movie is the animation. To be fair, a lot of it still holds up, but some scenes look a bit dated, and some of the backgrounds seem a bit, well, empty. Other than that, it's an extremely well made animated film.
1.
Monsters Inc. is a film that I've seen way too many times. That's probably because it was always my favourite Pixar film growing up, and luckily it still holds up. Everything is great here, from the story to the characters, and it probably has my favourite Pixar soundtrack ever. It's also incredibly funny, no thanks to the chemistry between Mike and Sully. It's been spoke about to death, but the relationship between Sully and Boo is very powerful, and Boo luckily doesn't come off as annoying because of it. The twist villain works really well in this film, as it's subtly hinted at you throughout it, and it makes sense. The reason why Waternoose is doing it doesn't come out of left field. Running a company that has been in the family for that long would have resulted in a lot of pressure for Mr. Waternoose. Like in real life, it's far from a stretch that a CEO from a company would do shady things to keep it afloat. Monsters Inc. is a clear contender for the best ever Pixar film. I did it. I ranked every Pixar film. And it's sad how mid most of their films are nowadays. They are so similar in quality, and it's kind of hard to rank them. So if I put one you loved above another, there's a good chance there wasn't much in it at all. I'll guess I'll review the DreamWorks movies too at some point. But then again, that means I have to watch
Singing killed my grandma, okay?